So today I'm really excited about the people we have here because they're in that space that can be really hard to work with business leaders. And we've seen that just recently with the Paris Climate Accords. We've got two city innovators. Karen Weigert is a senior fellow right now on global cities at the Chicago Council on Global Affairs, which is a very prestigious council. But that came out of her years both as a documentary maker, and then she was the first chief sustainability officer for the city of Chicago, and that was from 2011 to 2016. And let me tell you something, before Mayor Emanuel set up that program, Chicago was a city where people were literally dying because of environmental problems when they had a heat wave during previous mayors, and they had to find new ways to come up with solutions. And now, under Karen's leadership, they're on the cutting edge. So I'm really excited if Karen Weigert will come out. She's one of our speakers. And I'm also excited for the other speaker we've got, Dave Forcell, because David is the president of Keep Indianapolis Beautiful. And you can really see through his work what they're doing at the grassroots level. Keep Indianapolis Beautiful already has 900 annual community projects that he oversees. That's a lot for a city that size to try and keep track of and to try and keep the momentum moving forward. So these are two people who can really speak to how to motivate people at the grassroots level. So let's give a big round of applause for our next two speakers.
And look, happy to help.
Oh, the handy iPad.
Exactly.
Great. Okay. So that we can use our time efficiently, I'm going to let Dave start because he's got some slides he's going to show us to talk about some best practices, and Karen's going to say a couple words, and then we're just going to try and get straight to it with your questions.
Awesome. Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. Hey, everybody. So I did bring just a few slides. There is a theologian that I'm familiar with, actually, that was in charge at Harvard a few years back, wrote a really good book. He talked about thin places where there was this relationship, one on the other side, between God and people. Well, my conversation isn't about God and people, but it is about thin places. This first slide shows 24 beaming faces. Those are my wonderful colleagues at Keep Indianapolis Beautiful. However, we serve hundreds of neighborhoods through our work, and we have 19,000 or so volunteers at this point. And so what I'd like to say is that the work of urban environment really is about our community. KIB is the community. We are a reflection of the community's desire in terms of environmental improvement and quality of life. It does absolutely matter, Keep Indianapolis Beautiful, and we'll get to some of this research as well. Speed through a couple of these. I'll tell you this too, that I'm happy to touch more on this as we go along, but the work of urban environment in Indianapolis, not only is it social and environmental and economic, but it also is deeply personal. And one of these stories, these gents here, is Pastor Kenneth Ward. Pastor Kenneth Ward used green space to create a beautiful park for the children in his daycare. The vacant lot had been home to gangs and drugs and dog fights to the death and blight. Instead, it's now a place where the children tend vegetables for the seniors in community. The point there is that green spaces and the relationship between green places and people in the city is remarkable and important and impactful. The gentleman you see with that 1964 Pontiac Bonneville behind him, that's Danny Marquez. Danny Marquez spent time in prison. He was tearing up the neighborhoods that he lived in. When he got out of prison, he said, I needed to make a change. And so in this West Side neighborhood in Indianapolis, he created a park with neighbors on his block. He wanted it to reflect the values and the culture of an LA-influenced Hispanic community, he said. And so that's what he got. A 1964 Pontiac Bonneville is a piece of art, along with a casita, sunflowers, and native landscapes to serve the community. And finally, I'd like to touch a little bit on Mari. This is where our work is personal, deeply personal. Mari started with Keep Indianapolis Beautiful, planting trees with us. Planting trees, thousands of trees, and planting and tending them along with hundreds of other youth. Well, Mari started with us when she was 17. and was in a public school, not a lot of extra income, not quite sure what was next for her from a school standpoint. But she worked with us for a couple of summers and decided, you know what? Purdue University might be a place I might be able to study my new passion, wildlife science. And since that time, she's worked at Indiana Dunes Lakeshore, and now she's back to keep Indianapolis beautiful as an adult, planting trees with community in our city. I'd be happy to touch on all of this and also just a little bit about how KIB has grown to be such an influencer in our city and some of the secrets that I think have been most important to taking an idea and to moving it beyond even what I could have imagined.
Great, because our audience is already coming through both online and here with some great questions. So Karen, when you talk about your work, I'm even going to tee it up with one of the questions that's already getting a lot of votes for wanting people to take on, which is how do you convince city leaders to prioritize the environment over other problems? So to be the first chief sustainability officer in Chicago, Mayor Emanuel also is dealing with crime and some other notable problems in Chicago. I mentioned to the audience, Mayor Daley faced literally elderly people dying from heat waves and you all innovating with green roofs, but you became cutting edge. So how did you how were you able to prioritize the environment when Chicago has so many competing issues?
Absolutely. First of all, it's a total pleasure to be here. This is an amazing group. And this really speaks to how you have some of those challenging questions. And it's, what's the future that we're trying to build together? I mean, we used to talk about sustainability in Chicago as it was part of making the city more competitive and making the city more livable. So when we think about the kinds of solutions that happen on the ground, they are often actually creating a paycheck. So when you look in the state of Illinois, there are 100,000 plus jobs in clean energy. That's helping our neighborhoods, that's helping our families. Or you can look at some of the programs we started. We started a program called the Green Corps Chicago Youth Program, but it's a summer job program for some of our high school students who may not have a lot of economic opportunities. Absolutely, they're doing sustainability work that is meaningful. They're building in their neighborhood, they're greening their neighborhood, they're removing invasive species, they're building bikes, they're offering community bike repair. But they're getting a paid summer job with a mentor, with an instructor. It's a part of the pathway forward. So we need to incorporate all the different parts of our cities into the solutions that strengthen the place overall.
So environmentalism is a solution to crime and everything else that you
Yeah, it was really amazing. We actually track the data. Data is incredibly helpful in understanding what happens. And in that first summer of Green Corps, none of our youth who were part of our program were involved in an act of violence. So we
That's
are
remarkable.
creating different pathways for people across the city. And at the same time, we're building the city that more and more people will want to live in, but that more and more people will have a chance to help shape together.
She must be exhausted because I worked with Rahm Emanuel in the Clinton White House, and he is inexhaustible. He was a prima ballerina in his youth, and he's got a lot of energy. Let me ask you about environmental priorities, because Indiana and Indianapolis are both places where you have differing political viewpoints. With Chicago, it's just kind of a question of which Democratic mayor is going to be elected. But with Indianapolis, how do you change with the changing tides?
Yeah, I think it's very interesting. Obviously, Indianapolis sits in a very deep red state. We are a blue dot in that red state, but nonetheless, that culture does also need to be considered. There is definitely a mix. And so really at the end of the day, in Indianapolis, what it boils down to is really being pragmatic. And so, like Karen said, when we plant trees, it's not just for the pretty. It's also about stormwater mitigation, cleaner water in our streams, youth jobs, neighborhood empowerment and value. And so sometimes in Indianapolis, and I'm sure in other cities around the country, environment may not be number one, but it easily can be paired with other social good or economic good.
So one of the questions that the audience is asking most frequently of both of you is now, how do you approach the Paris Climate Accord? So I'm curious if your mayors are signatories to the letter that the mayors all signed out. When President Trump pulled out, he said, I'm the president fighting for Pittsburgh, not for Paris. And then the Pittsburgh mayor signed the pledge to go ahead with the agreement. So tell us where you are in terms of specifically the Paris Climate Accord, but then also what you just do to fight that fight when now the ground is shifting.
Yeah, and the Paris Climate Accord is something that's front and center for so many people, and it's going to continue to be. And absolutely, Chicago is a signatory. It will continue to do its part to fight the challenges of climate change and to reduce emissions. To be specific about that, a couple of years ago, the city pulled coal out of the electricity that supplies Chicago, and at the same time, the last 2 coal-fired power plants in urban America were closed in the city of Chicago. So that not only is tremendous for emissions, it makes a real difference in local health. Now the city's building on that. The city's now committed to support all of its buildings through renewable power by 2025. And so there are very specific kinds of things that cities can do. And I'd put forward, when we think about Paris, the nation officially is the signatory, but think of the proxy nation. That's all of us. That's cities. That is companies. That is states. Actions at all of those levels can drive carbon reductions, and we've got to keep that effort moving.
In Indianapolis, Mayor Hogsett, I don't believe has signed it yet. However, he has written a news release yet this week talking about how it is that he will join with others in the philanthropic and nonprofit communities along with government to get busy and busier on climate. We are planting our trees in part through an EPA consent decree. And so, in fact, that is still in play. And so we feel good about that in the long run.
It's going to be a tough spot to be in because, let's face it, the cities are the larger polluters in the U.S. Agriculture has a lot of environmental regulations, and yet they might say, it's not our job to control air quality when the cities are the bigger polluters. So you've got that constant push and pull. So let me, I see Karen
yes,
saying,
it's interesting.
I've opened a can of worms because what I really want to get to is this good question that a lot of people in the audience are asking, which is, what are like individual tactics that you've pursued in Chicago and in Indianapolis to raise the bar? What are some of the programs you all have enacted that other cities could replicate and try and follow your lead?
Absolutely. And first of all, I'd love to toss one thing out because it's always really interesting when you look at the maps of where do carbon emissions come from, because they're concentrated in cities. But if you look at those maps on a per capita basis, the story flips. On a per capita basis, individuals living in cities emit less. So we actually mapped Chicago and the suburbs of Chicago in the nation, and emissions per capita are lowest in the city of Chicago. They're also lower in the suburbs than the nation.
No, there's all kinds of agricultural reasons for that. That's why we spend so much time studying cows and methane. And, so you're absolutely right, but I just know there's going to be that push and pull.
Yeah,
but
so you asked a question about, so what do we go do? I mean, that's really what this comes down to. Here's today, what do we do today and tomorrow? So in cities of all sizes, in communities of all sizes, you've got a range of choices. So what are some of the things we've done in Chicago? Well, we've started a program to retrofit our buildings. So when you look at the emissions that come out of cities, typically the largest source is heating, cooling, and operating buildings. So you at home, you can control the heating and the cooling. You can control the lights. It sometimes feels that we live online or we live in an airplane, but we live somewhere. And that community can actually do something. And you can do something in your home on the largest source of emissions coming out of cities. And then you can build from that. The second largest source is typically transportation. So how do you get around? Well, in the city of Chicago, we were lucky enough to launch the Divvy Bike Share program, which now we have bike stations all over the city. And each bike station is actually solar powered. But we've also created programs so that folks who don't have a lot of money can participate, because you actually need a credit card to join those programs, and not every one of our residents does. So we're trying to make sure that the solutions are inclusive, because that's the way we win in the long run. We create a vibrant city for everyone with specific actions that we can all take part in.
I would say for people who want to get involved, certainly Keep Indianapolis Beautiful, I think, is the largest affiliate of Keep America Beautiful. But there are
how did that happen?
Literally, well, I think we are effective at what we do, and we understand what our community needs, and we listen very carefully, and we act in love.
And they hire the right people, I guess.
Okay, so cheesy, but we really care about the needs of the community, and we get things done there in Indianapolis. So. Keep America Beautiful affiliates around the country. You can get engaged with those. Also, Arbor Day Foundation has the Alliance for Community Trees, which has hundreds of cities engaged. And the other thing is, if you have an opportunity, plant a tree. Plant a native plant, native to your area. Do a pollinator count. There are so many ways to do fun and cool things as an individual.
You've got me motivated. I love this question, and I'm going to read it exactly as it's worded. It's now shot up to the top as the #1 question everyone wants answered. How do you work with underserved populations when their lived experiences are so different from your own and your staff's?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the first question is, are you having conversations with folks who represent the communities of your city? So as an interesting example, Chicago has about 3 million people in it. And when I joined the mayor's office, I believed but didn't know if sustainability was happening in all of our neighborhoods. So one thing that happened was we worked with a local nonprofit, and they hired a bunch of college students who went around and visited all 77 distinct neighborhoods in the city of Chicago and found sustainability happening at the local level in every one. And so how do you do this? You actually start a conversation with everyone. You go specifically to a neighborhood, and then you find out what are the actual challenges on the ground. What is the problem that an individual is actually trying to solve? Is it about air quality? Well, we got to go after that. Now, when you're addressing air quality, you're often addressing combustion engines, you're addressing vehicles, you're addressing power plants. Those things relate to carbon. You have to think about, is someone trying to find a job? Well, do you have a training program that leads into these fast-growing industries? I think 1 in 50 new jobs nationally last year came in solar. Do you have a program that can actually give someone a pathway forward? And sometimes it's questions that are your meetings accessible, truly accessible? Do you offer childcare for folks who have to work? Is there food for folks who might be needing to spend some time there but don't have some food? So you have to actually open the doors in ways that are inclusive. So by no means have we solved all of this. I think we have to continue to have engagement and have to continue to find practical solutions that make a difference every day.
Was Flint an outlier, or do we have multiple Flints that we just aren't paying attention to?
I think the Flint question is an incredibly challenging one. Within that, you've got questions of infrastructure, but also financial management questions. And hopefully, we'll all continue to keep the focus on the multiple decisions. What's the infrastructure we put into place? How do we keep it healthy? But then how do we listen when you start to hear those alarm bells going off? So I think the focus on Flint ideally has focused a lot more people on the challenges of water infrastructure.
And as a journalist, there's plenty of blame to be spread around for multiple people and multiple agencies and multiple sides not listening.
If I may, I'd love to also say that if your staff is not able to look quite like the community, you work really hard to get to that place where your staff is looking more and more like the community. So we're very conscious of that at KIB and are working very practically, actually, and have diversified our staff considerably, which I'm very proud of. We're just better that way.
Yeah.
We are just better that way. We've done it at the board level as well.
Oh, see, that's interesting because that's not something everyone thinks about, but your board of directors absolutely will have that influence. Here's a question that a lot of people are asking, but you could take it in several different contexts, so I'm going to let you decide. The question is, how do you ensure intersectionality in your work? I wish we had the questioner here in the audience to expand. I think it's an online question. But tackle that from the perspective you think that they mean.
There's 2 things that come to mind for me. Right now what we do is KIB is really a broker between people who have a great vision for their life and don't have quite the resources to get it done with people with the resources who are absolutely ready to serve. And what is remarkable is what can happen and the relationship and awareness and community building that can take place in that realm. The other thing in terms of intersection is we're going to be working harder and harder to get our groups of corporate volunteers, our groups of neighborhood volunteers, even more aware of the most important issues that animate the work of KIB.
So I'm going to combine our next top 3 vote getters. I'm going to let you kind of play off of each of them so that we can take advantage. We're running out of time. What are some strategies to use in urban environments to impact public health? How do you get local people to care about the direct impact? And what one behavior should I change right now? So you can't answer all 3 of those, but pick apart that whole idea and close us out. Karen?
Well, first of all, get involved. We know that. People who are here or are paying attention online are involved. But I mean really get involved. Find out when your city council meets. Find out who is actually elected to represent you in your city. Wherever it is that you wake up in the morning, someone is supposed to be representing you. Find out who that person is. And then find out what information actually matters in your community. One of the great challenges is there data, but is it actually representative of the lived experience in your community? So it's amazing to think about what does air quality look like in different neighborhoods. It's vastly different. What does flooding look like in different neighborhoods? Again, vastly different. So how do you find the challenge that is real and that is relevant? And how do you find that elected official? Because we know so many global issues. They all have a local face. In the middle are cities who are spending money every day. They're spending your money to make lives better. If they can have your input, if they can have your experience, that money will get spent better. It'll change a life today, and it'll change the bigger picture for all of us for tomorrow.
Dave, you're going to have to do it fast. I've never met a conference that's so good about sticking to the time, which is always good for everyone.
I would reinforce that community building and community-inspired green placemaking has a remarkable impact on public safety, which is a public health issue. That if we can figure out ways to use environment in cities to build community, it's a remarkable path towards better community health.
These are foot soldiers. I think also, too, if you are in a community and you want to reach out to them in their offices directly, I bet you might even get a reply. So thank you all for doing so much in important places in this country, and proving that each city can make a difference. Thank you.
Thank you.